Welcome to our next segment. This is part 4 of our exploration of the art of Indigenous Americas. We're going to be looking at Incan art in this video. We'll be looking at some artifacts as well as some architecture. So I'm going to give you just a little bit of background information. Incan architecture defies the odds. I'll go ahead and show you an example by building impressive and very well-designed cities in some of the most inaccessible or inhospitable places on Earth. I mean, you have to think about a lot of this. I mean, some of these cultures lived, along mountaintops and, very treacherous terrain, so it would have been very difficult in terms of architecture. Typically, Incan builders used ashlar masonry, or perfectly grooved and fitted stones placed together in almost a jigsaw puzzle arrangement. All stones have slightly beveled edges that emphasize the joints. The buildings tend to taper upward like a trapezoid. I think you can see this in this example. And this trapezoid shape was a sort of favorite shape for buildings of the early Americans. The Incan Empire was very impressive and stretched from Chile to Colombia and was very well maintained by an organized system of roads that united the country in an efficient communication network. The Inca had no written language, though much of what we know about the civilization has been deduced from archaeological remains. So what you're looking at is a sort of artifact or tiny sculpture of a maize cob. It's done in sheet metal and a technique called repoussé. And these were kind of used to make these very tiny miniature gardens. So if you can imagine a multitude of these little artifacts, we're creating a garden of gold and silver. And so there were various miniature objects, llamas, some animals, corn, which you see an example here, flowers, and people, and all made of gold and silver. Such gardens existed in the courtyard in one of the most important Inca temples, the Oricancha, and it's spelled Orikancha, and this is located in the capital city of Cusco, Cuzco. And this is one of these beautiful metal objects that you see. It's gold and silver alloy combined, or using the repoussé technique to make this sort of corn cob sculpture. It mimics the appearance of a ripe ear of corn breaking through its husk, still on the stalk but ready to be harvested. In the sculptural representation of maize, individual kernels of corn protrude from the cob that is nestled in these jagged metallic leaves. Inca metalsmiths expertly combined silver and copper to mimic the internal and external components of actual corn. Hollow and delicate. The ears of the corn on the stalk are life-size. While many ancient Andean art traditions favored abstract and geometric forms, Inca really used their visual expression as a way of incorporating more naturalistic forms and small-scale metal objects. The silver alloy corn cob sculpture is one example of this type of object. After the Spaniards arrived in the Andes, the European invaders soon desired the gold and silver belonging to the Inca. Some of the earliest Spanish chroniclers record the placement of a garden composed of gold and silver objects among many of the offerings and rituals spaces in Oricancha. Pedro de Ciza de Leon describes a golden garden in one of his accounts that he wrote in 1554. And this is what he wrote. In the month of October of the year of our Lord, 1534, the Spaniards entered the city of Cusco, which you see here. head of the great empire of the Incas, where their court was, as well as the solemn temple of the sun and their greatest marvel. We'll be looking at this architecture in more detail in a minute. The high priest abandoned the temple, where the Spaniards plundered the garden of gold and sheep, llamas, and shepherds, all of this metal along with so much silver that it is unbelievable, and precious stones, which, if they were collected, would be worth a city. So here's an example of a little miniature gold llama figurine. So after the defeat of the Inca leadership in the 1530s, Spanish royal agents set up colonies across the continent. They looted Inca objects in large quantities and sent many back to Spain. The silver corn cob and stalk were likely part of the spoils captured in this raid. By 1534, the collection of the Spanish king, Charles V, included a gold maize stalk with 3 levels and 2 ears of corn, similar to the one that we just looked at. I'll go back to it. Royal inventories also describe gold and silver llamas, female figures, lambs, and male figures that probably originated in one of the most important Inca temples in the capital city of Cusco, the Oricancha. So remember, a lot of these artifacts were used, that we've seen with Mesoamerican culture, as offerings. And so this life-size garden of gold and silver was a significant offering within the Oricancha temple, where it became part of a compact version of the cosmos controlled by the Inca state. It also represented the vast range of ecosystems encompassed by the empire and the most important agricultural products cultivated in them. The empire reached from the desert coast to over 600 feet above sea level. Plants and animals represented in the Golden Garden cannot grow and survive at every point in the empire, but only at specific altitudes. For example, maize grows up to a mid-range altitude, and llamas graze at the highest point of the empire. The metallic maize cobs would have represented one of the most important imperial foodstuffs used for making maize beer, or chicha, C-H-I-C-H-A, consumed at political feasts, which cemented the obligations of local political leaders to the Inca state. So one of the important things we have to think about in terms of comparing to other ancient cultures and early and late European cultures is this idea of agriculture. And so for centuries the people of the Andes had an organized agricultural system called a vertical archipelago, which was a system and terracing technology that allowed the Andean people to obtain food and materials that they needed to survive from different elevations. So again, only, corn could be harvested at a certain elevation, grow and harvested at a certain elevation. Only llamas could graze at a certain elevation. So you have to kind of think about this in this mountainous terrain, which is very different than, say, sort of the agricultural system that the Egyptians used in terms of, living next to a river. So those are some other cross currents that you should think about. The Inca adopted this vertical archipelago system and really enhanced it and exploited it on an imperial scale. The Oricancha's garden, this sort of symbolic silver and gold garden, asserted the natural world as a possession of the Inca, and at the same time it reinforced their divine right to rule across the Andes. The Inca commonly deployed small-scale naturalistic metallic offerings. We've seen some examples of the maize as well as the llamas. And, in ritual practices, they use these small offerings to support state and religion and government. Offerings have been found across the Inca territories. Besides corn, these offerings include small gold, silver human figurines ornamented with textiles that accompany this some of the sacrifices that the Incas engaged in during their empire. All these offerings acted as a symbol of the supernatural origin of the Incas in the sun and their control over the natural world as descendants from the most powerful deity. One of these sacrifices that some of these metal offerings were made to was a sacrifice known as the Hapak Hucha, H-A-P-A-Q, and then another word, H-U-C-H-A. And this really was a practice of sacrificing children. And the idea behind of it was that they wanted to send their best, and I guess most innocent, to the deity. So clearly, something we need to think about too with, these sort of rituals and blood sacrifices and human sacrifices that the Mesoamericans did participate in is that when, the Europeans came over, they were horrified by this practice. So, they found it very disdainful and were very disgusted by it. And so you could sort of see how a rift between European and these indigenous cultures came about, and it really was just this sort of lack of understanding of these sort of cultural practices, and we still see that today going on in our global world. Alright, so now we're going to be looking at the city of Cusco. What you're looking at is the modern city of Cusco today, overlooking the Plaza de Armas. And it really has a breathtaking elevation of about 11,200 feet. And the city of Cusco was not just the capital of Tawantinsuyo, which is referred to as the land of the four quarters, the Inca name for their empire in their native language, Quichu, and I'll spell it Tawantinsuyu, so land of the four quarters. And this was considered an axis mundi. We talked about that in our last segment. Remember, the axis mundi is sort of a philosophical belief that a lot of cultures share, that a certain point, maybe, some sort of site or marker is the center of the world, or maybe some sort of marker that defines this line between sacred and secular, or heaven and earth. For them, the axis mundi was the center of existence and a reflection of Inca power. The city was divided into two sections, Hana, upper or high, and Huron, lower. Hanan is spelled H-A-N-A-N, and Huron, H-U-R-I-N, which paralleled the social organization of Inca society into upper and lower social divisions. Cusco was further divided into quadrants that reflected the four divisions of the empire, and people from those sections inhabited their respective quarters of the city. In this way, the city was a map and a miniature of the entire Inca empire, and a way for the Inca rulers to explicitly display their power to shape and order that empire. Some scholars think that the city was deliberately laid out so that it was in the shape of a puma. I don't know if you can see that, which was the symbol of Inca power, and it was considered a royal symbol, but this is still up for debate. One of the most interesting, I think, features of Incan architecture is the masonry that they used. It really displayed an understanding of stone, and this idea of the way stone, they sort of correlated to stone as being like a person, in that many different ones may fit together if they're properly organized. So this kind of relates back to the plan and organization of their city. Each individual stone was pecked with tools that fitted to the one next to it, with the result that blocks will have a varied number of sides, such as the famous 12-sided stone in the walls of the Hutan Rumayak Street, which was, I guess, an apparently famous stone. Some sides of each stone were made to curve outward slightly, others to be slightly concave so that the stone slotted together while still allowing a small amount of movement. The ability to move a little was important in an area that is seismically active. So again, earthquakes and things like that. So this kind of flexibility of the stone would allow the structure to hopefully sustain going through an earthquake, and protect the wall from earthquakes. And this kind of masonry technique is known as ashlar masonry. We did see this too with the building of the Egyptian pyramid. So again, this is another important cross current that you could do a compare and contrast with. The city was really busy with activity, both religious and secular. Not only the Inca rulers and their nobles resided in Cusco. Here, I'll go back. Here's a temple that we're going to be looking at. Local leaders from all sections of the empire also lived in Cusco, often compelled to do so as a means of controlling their home populations. Girls and young women were drawn from across the empire to the capital to serve as cloistered alcas, A-C-L-L-A-S, or chosen women, to weave fine cloth for the gods and nobles, and to make corn beer for religious rituals, also to serve the gods in shrines, and in some cases to be given to Inca favorites, or citizens or royalty or aristocrat in marriage. Young men were also brought to Cusco to be educated and raised in the Inca culture. When they returned to their homes, they would be valuable advocates for Inca traditions and power. In addition to the Inca gods and ancestral mummies that were kept in the capital, there were also captured gods of subject people brought there as another means of controlling their followers. So what we're looking at is the remains of Orikanchi, that temple. And again, when you look at the masonry, you can see that the stones are different in sizes and even shapes to a certain point. They're not uniform, but they do really fit snugly together. You can get a better sense of it in this detail. So at the heart of Huron, Cusco, was Orikancha, which is also translated into Golden House. And this was the most sacred shrine of the Inca, dedicated to the worship of the sun. While the Inca had many gods, they claimed descent from the sun, whom they called Inti, I-N-T-I, and held the sun's worship above all others. The Orikancha was the center point of the empire, and from it, supposedly, these imaginary lines called sequus, C-E-Q-U-E-S, sort of radiated from the shrine and connected the shrine throughout the Cusco Valley to different smaller shrines. And so there's a scholar who refers to the sequus as sort of a landscape calendar and cosmogram, as the shrines were often markers or used as markers of time, with different noble families tending to and holding rituals at the shrines around the Sika system throughout the year. After the conquest, the Orikancha was one of the many Inca shrines turned into a Christian holy space. The monastery and church of Santo Domingo were built around and on top of the original shrine, incorporating the old structure into the new one in a way that makes for a strange appearance today. Parts of the old temple are still visible inside and out, alternating with this sort of Spanish Baroque architecture. The Orikancha itself was renovated by the first emperor, Pachacuti, Inca Yupanaqui, after he had a mystical revelation that declared him a divine king. So I'm just going to spell his first name, P-A-C-H-A-C-U-T-I. All of the doorways, windows, and wall niches of the Orikancha had that very distinct trapezoid shape that we talked about earlier. We see doorways that have double jammed. And again, this is to signify the importance of the building. The exceptionally fine masonry of the Ora Concha was reserved for the most important buildings, since it was even more time-consuming than regular Inca stonework that we talked about before. So rather than fitting each stone together as an individual shape, creating an irregular-looking surface, here they were shaped into even courses of rectangular blocks and polished to a smooth finish. The walls were then covered in sheets of gold to signify the shrine's dedication to, and I think the god's name is Niti, not Inti, so Niti, I-N-T-I, that would have reflected the sun's rays with a blinding brilliance. Again, think about the pyramids, this use of this sort of ashlar masonry. But the spectacular radiating exterior was not the apex of the building's wonders. Inside was a reproduction of the world in a miniature that took the shape of a garden made from gold, silver, and jewels with people, animals, and plants. So this goes back to the silver and gold sort of garden and some of the various objects that we looked at. We had talked about this in the earlier part of the segment. The riches of the Ora Concha would be again taken to looted after the Spanish conquest in 1532, and then melted down for their precious metal. So another architecture feature we're going to be looking at in Cusco is Softwa Llama. This looks down on the city of Cusco from the northwest. And it's a structure that is made up of these zigzagging walls, and it's been described as a fortress, although there are still many questions on how it functioned in that capacity, and the purpose of some of its features are debated. It is possible that it was never finished, or the parts of it were left incomplete at the time of conquest. The stones used to construct it were much larger than those used in the streets. Houses in the sort of urban part of Cusco. The stones were quarried and hauled into place using considerable manpower, obtained through this labor tax that they had imposed, referred to as a mita, M-I-T-A, that all able-bodied people of the empire owed to the Inca. So again, instead of like paying some sort of monetary or, like precious, they paid with their labor. So everybody was expected to sort of chip in their labor to build these grand architectural structures. Now we're going to be looking at a different archaeological site in Peru called Machu Picchu. You've probably heard of this before. It's very famous. It's often been described as a very mysterious site. But we do, in fact, know a great deal about it, about its construction and about its purpose. It was built as a royal estate for the first Inca Empire, Pachacuti. Again, that first name I told you, P-A-C-H-A-C-U-T-I, Inca Yupanaqua, in the middle of the 15th century on a mountain saddle overlooking the Urubamba River in modern-day Peru. The location was approximately a 3 days walk from the Inca capital of Cusco and nearly 3,000 feet lower in elevation. And it supposedly had a very pleasant climate. It was intended as a place where the Inca emperor and his family could host feasts, perform religious ceremonies, and administer the affairs of the empire, while also establishing a claim to the land that would be owned by his lineage after his death. The site was chosen and situated for its relationship to the Andean landscape, including sight lines to other mountain peaks called Apus, A-P-U-S, which had long been considered ancestral deities throughout the Andes. The site contained houses for elites, retainers and maintenance staff, religious shrines, fountains, and terraces, as well as carved rock outcrops, and signature elements of Inca art that we can see in this site. So again, another comparison I think would be interesting is to maybe compare this to the Palace of Versailles, King Louis XIV, and, how he sort of moved his court into the countryside and the sort of suburb outside of Paris. I think you can make, again, some interesting comparisons and contrasts between the two. The site features architecture from houses to terraces built by carefully fitting individual stones against each other. Terraces were a common element of highland agriculture long before the Inca. That was that sort of archipelago system we talked about, where they had to sort of grow things and farm animals at different elevations because of the rocky terrain. They increased the arable land surface and reduced erosion by creating these walled steps down the side of a steep mountain. So you can see that here. Each step could then be planted with crops. Terracing took advantage of the landscape and provided some substance for the emperor and his entourage during his visit, as well as producing ritual important maize crops. Further provisions came from the rich lands at the foot of the mountain peak, which were also beholden to Pachacuti and his family. Water management at the site was crucial, and throughout Machu Picchu system, there's a system of stone channels. Sorry about that. There's a system of stone channels that drain water from the rainfall and from a spring near the site. Some of the water was channeled to stone fountains. Again, this is a really good comparison to the Palace of Versailles with all their fountains and gardens and how they might have had, and remember how they had to sort of channel water to get these fountains and to water the gardens. There are 16 in all, descending in elevation through the site. The first in the series is placed outside the door of the emperor's compound. That fountain is constructed with walls that may have created a ritual bath for the emperor, connected to his duties as a sacred king who performed religious rituals. So what we're looking at is some part of what remains of the main building. And again, it's very typical of Inca elite architecture. We see that trapezoid shape used in the windows. The walls were built of stone and had been individually shaped to fit close with one another rather than being shaped into smaller units. This was accomplished by a laborious process of, again, pecking the stone with tools and then gradually shaping them so that each stone was uniquely nestled against those around it. We talked about this earlier. And so each stone had some sides that protruded slightly, and some were had these sort of concaved faces, socketing the stones so that they held together by allowing, and again, this really allowed these structures to have, some sort of flexibility and perhaps protection from the earthquake environment that they lived in. Outward faces of the stonework were then worked smooth or polished smooth so that the walls resembled an intricate mosaic. Most structures were roofed with wood and thatch. Entryways were in the unique Inca shape of a trapezoid rather than a rectangle. The trapezoid shape was also used, again, for the niches in the windows and the walls of the building. Buildings for people of or activities of lower status were made using a rough construction technique that did not take as much time to shape the stones as the sort of elite masonry technique that they used for the royal, more important buildings. So something to think about, too, when we're looking at these architecture and archaeological sites is the population and social dynamics. We sort of saw that when we looked at the city plan of the city of Cusco. With Machu Picchu, the emperor and his retinue, entourage, his court, whatever, would only reside there for a certain part of the year. Most of the people who lived there permanently were retainers or other sort of people that were obligated to move to that location in order to sort of sustain it. The retainers were called Yanacanas, Ynaconas, and Mitimaes, I know I'm saying this wrong, Mitimaes. And there's evidence that has been found that the retainers, the Yanaconas, that's probably how you pronounce it, were craftspeople, including metalsmiths, who came from all over the empire. The ability to command people, again, was something really important across the empire, and oblige them to work for the Inca nobility was an expression of their imperial power. The building of Machu Picchu clearly shows the social divisions of the site, with most of the high-status residential buildings in a cluster to the northeast. The emperor himself lived in a separate compound at the southwest of the site, indicating his unique status as the ruler. We're going to be looking at something called the observatory. Here, I'll show it to you. This is an example of the observatory below. Was adjacent to the royal residence, emphasizing the relationship between the elites' religious rituals and astronomical observation, including Pachacututes, and this is the ruler's claim as both a descendant of the sun, whom the Inca again called Niti, the sun itself. One of the obligations of the royal family was performing rituals that sustained relationships with supernatural forces that drove, that they depended on in terms of their existence. The number of religious structures at Machu Picchu is very high, indicating that Pachacuti and his lineage were heavily involved in the religious functioning of the empire and a task that underscored his right to rule. And again, we see this with the Roman emperors, we see this with Christian emperors, and sort of this idea of building churches and religious structures, not only to benefit their kingdom or empire and the people living in it, but also to sort of establish their royal lineage and their right to rule. And it gives their and also to be a legacy, after they pass on. So let's focus on the observatory, also called the Temple of the Sun. This building's purpose is echoed in its unique shape. It's composed of two main parts, an upper curved stone enclosure with windows and niches placed in it, and a cave beneath the structure with masonry additions that hold more niches. Modifications of the windows in the observatory's upper walls indicate that they were used to calculate the June solstice, as well as the first morning rise of the constellation Pleiades and other important constellations. The cave beneath the enclosure may refer to the place of the underworld in the Inca myth, making the observatory a building that embodied cosmological thought as much as it facilitated this idea of actual astronomical observation. So it's sort of a mixture of astronomy and astrology. All right, one last feature of Machu Picchu. And this is referred to as the Intihuatana, or the Hitching Post of the Sun. It's a carved boulder located in the ritual area of the site to the west of the main plaza. Carved boulders were part of the Inca relationship with the earth, and expressions of belief in a landscape inhabited by supernatural forces. Carved boulders of this type are found throughout the heart of the Inca Empire. The stone's name refers to the idea that it was used to track the passage of the sun throughout the year, part of the reckoning of time used to determine when religious events would take place. And it worked in a very similar way as the observatory that we looked at earlier. All right, so I'm going to stop here. We still have a lot more to cover with Mesoamerican or Indigenous America art. We're still going to be looking at the Inca culture. In our next segment, we're going to be focusing on luxury goods like textiles. So stay tuned.